Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello again. This is Tonya Barango, the self-care maven, founder of Freedom at the Crossroads and the Undomesticated Woman podcast. And I am here for every black woman over 40 who's looking to liberate herself from burnout, overwhelm, toxicity, and just living on the altar of other people's expectations. Here at Freedom at the Crossroads, it's about liberation, it's about travel, it's about living our best lives, decentering white supremacy, decentering patriarchy, and centering ourselves. It's about getting off the altar of everybody else's expectations and living our best lives. And today's topic, yes, ladies, always going to be talking about self-care. In particular, today I'm talking about decolonizing and decentering whiteness in our wellness practices, particularly our self-care practices. Now, you've heard me if you've been following me for a while here and on Instagram and my other platforms. You know that I am a strong advocate for us going back to our own practices of self-care that center our own health and wellness, that is culturally relevant, and that harkens back to those practices that centered us, our health and well-being as black people, specifically as black women. For anyone who's a little bit unclear, and I say that in quotes, the self-care that's promoted in mainstream media, this basically has nothing to do with us. It's essentially very exploitative. If you strip away the trappings and the toxic positivity, you too will arrive at the conclusion that that version of self-care is not accessible to us and it wasn't built for us. It is largely an amalgamation of indigenous and non-white practices stolen and appropriated from other groups around the world and repackaged for commercial use. And again, to liberate you from your money. And here in this space, we talk about decolonizing your self-care practices with the understanding that self-care, as it's truly meant to be practiced and incorporated into the lives of human beings, looks very different from what is marketed to you in mainstream social media and at large. Now, I want to make a few points, but before I go on, I just want to remind you, if you want to hear more about decolonized self-care, if you want to know more about getting off the altar of other people's expectations, if you want to know more about living your best life as a liberated, undomesticated black woman over 40, living her best life, you're going to click that follow button, hit the notification so when I have another episode go live, or I am live on YouTube here, you won't miss any of the juicy stuff. So having said that, let's get back on point. I specifically say that this was not built for us. We are here in this space, decentering whiteness in self-care for black women. And I say this with the understanding and historical context of how, self-care has largely been promoted in this country. It's not one that's accessible to us, and that's just the realities of it. As your everyday working black mom or black woman, whatever, single, in a relationship, having family obligations and community obligations, most of them will tell you the same thing. That, I don't know what that is. I cannot relate. or I can relate to very little of it, and very little of it is relevant or accessible to me in a number of ways. And if you harken back to some of the earlier videos that I've spoken on this in detail with, and also I was on Tia Nikki Travels. We had an interesting and very in-depth conversation on this on her channel, where we were talking about self-care and the relevance of self-care to us as Black women and what that needs to look like. You can go to her channel and see that video as well. And you can also check out the videos here on my channel as well. And I have a few points I just want to hit on. I don't want to have a super long video talking about this, because when I go live later this month, I'm going to have, a more of a deep dive too on these same issues. And then also I'll be answering some questions at the same time. Some of the main points I need us to get. First, we need to understand that access is a thing. If you see a practice, if you see some activity or collection of activities that are geared towards wellness, let's just take fitness for instance, things like Pilates and yoga classes, okay? That's, bandied about as, this is going to work miracles for you, XYZ. Pilates, yoga, they're beautiful practices. They do a lot for your mind, body wellness. But let's keep it real. The way it is packaged and marketed is very inaccessible to the average woman, period. And for Black women, add extra to that. Why do I say that? Because a lot of these classes, just looking myself, someone who works in healthcare, makes, decent money. A lot of these classes are super expensive. A lot of them are, not really community based, because I've been to yoga classes that were held in other community spaces by people of color, where it's made very accessible to the community. But if you're not in that community, how accessible is that to you as a Black woman, particularly in time, when it comes to time, when it comes to money? A lot of these classes, a lot of these programs, the way they're packaged and presented to the public, it's very pricey. And that makes it what? Inaccessible, or virtually inaccessible. It's inaccessible in terms of when the classes are held. It's inaccessible in terms of the financial cost of taking advantage of such classes, and they're heavily promoted and commodified anyway. A lot of the real practices and the mindset behind these practices and how they're supposed to be carried out, a lot of that has been whitewashed, and there's a huge disconnect between the actual practice and what it should look like when it was, created by these other indigenous cultures and, non-white cultures who created these systems and these practices. There's a huge disconnect. I've been to classes where I'm like, ooh, okay, didn't know that. And then I've been to ones that have been, colonized, for lack of a better word. And so it's important to understand, again, that access is a thing. And it's very important to understand if something is not accessible to you, you can't take advantage of its benefits. Other points. Recognizing that we are all socially conditioned and impacted by the environment in which we live, specifically here in North America. We understand, or at least we should understand, and come to the awareness and recognition that we are all socially conditioned and impacted by white supremacy, patriarchy, and institutional racism. awareness is key to unpacking that, because as much as we'd like to say, as Black people, as a collective, that we understand the impact and damages of living in a society that was built on the exploitation and dehumanization of other people, we still need to understand that things like anti-Blackness, internalized racism, those are all effects as well. And so we need to do the internal work too, to deprogram and recover and heal from that. And part of that needs to be incorporated into our own self-care and wellness practices as we go back to the ways of our people and reconnect with the intrinsic meaning and context of self-care as it needs to be practiced by us, and will be the most beneficial to us, particularly as Black women. Also need us to understand self-care starts in the mind. It works from the inside outward. Contrary to what is, mainstream media's got y'all believing, self-care is both mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. That's not both, but it's multifaceted. You get the point where I'm going with this. And so mainstream, colonized, conventional self-care has a tendency to put a lot of focus on the physical benefits of self-care, i.e. fitness. Oh, you can get these abs, you can get these thighs, you can get this body by doing XYZ, doing this version of Pilates, doing this version of yoga. And it's very, very superficial. That keeps you very surface level. And the true healing aspects and benefits that you should take away from these practices, they're non-existent. And I would argue that it's on purpose, but that's a conversation for another time. So I'm going to keep running down my list of, points that we need to consider when we're talking about self-care, and when we begin, when we start cracking the nut around this whole self-care thing, because I need us to understand all of these points that I'm mentioning is honing in and emphasizing the fact that the version of self-care that's out there in mainstream media, it wasn't built for us. And so that's why I'm highlighting these points. And these are just a few of the points. I could give more, but then that would make the video a whole lot longer. And I don't want to do that to you. I want us to have conversations. I want us to think about these things as we move forward, especially in the season that we're in now, regionally and globally. These are things we need to really, really be niching down into as Black women if we want to be healthy, well, resilient, and living our best lives. This is the time for us to remove ourselves from living in survival mode. We have gotten to the point where our strategies that we used in the past have become maladaptive. These were strategies that our ancestors used, our parents, our fathers, our mothers, our grandmothers, our lineages, our ancestors used to survive living in an environment that was exploitative and dehumanizing. And they went through a number of horrific things so that we didn't have to. And they survived a lot of horrific things, particularly Black women, African women went through and continue to go through, so that we would have the privilege of standing where we are today. And so it's important that we release, not we understand, but we release maladaptive strategies and ways of doing things so that we can live our best lives, so that we can be healthy, so we can be liberated and focused to move to the next level as a collective of women. And so that's why we got to go back to the mind. We got to go back to self-care. We've got to go back to the way self-care is visualized and manifested for us as Black women, because I need us to understand being the blueprint also means that you're not like anybody else. And that also means that your ways of doing things, healing, nurturing, have to be contextual and built for you. And so let's get back to these main points. I need us to also know that there's no shame in not being okay. That's another point I want to touch on. For generations, for years, for decades, we have not had the space to ask for help. We have not had the space to show that we were not okay. We had that whole Black, strong Black woman trope, and I can live through this. I can, do this, do that. I can survive it all. No more putting our bodies on the line. No more, setting ourselves on fire to make other people feel comfortable. I need us to release that. That is suffering, that is detrimental, that is an aspect of white supremacy and racism. That shame, that discomfort that is negative, because there's some discomforts that are, a product of you going through change. Human beings are creatures that like habit. And when you break habits, there's some discomfort related to that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the discomfort and angst and pain that comes from living in something that is toxic, that doesn't serve your highest good. And I need us to release that. And part of that has to do with not using your voice, not asking for what you need or what you want or the support you need or the support that you want. I need us to release that. That is a byproduct too of white supremacy and racism. I need us to understand that. I need us to accept that and then deal with it and move on. Decolonize self-care is our antidote to mainstream colonized self-care. I've spoken on that enough. I think we get the point at this point. I hope that's ringing bells. I hope you're having some aha moments with that. There is a difference between conventional mainstream self-care and self-care that is contextual and culturally relevant for us. That is a version that will liberate us on all fronts as Black women. I need us to figure that out. I need us to internalize that right now. Okay? And then I need us to go back to the Sankofa way of doing things, the Sankofa way of thinking about things. And Sankofa, to the Akan people on the continent back in the day, and anybody who's heard that word, heard that term, it speaks to liberation as a collective of Black people, and a reaching back to and reconnecting with our cultural ways of doing things and the knowledge that was lost, but going back to reclaim it. Not that you live in the past, but that you learn and re-access that wisdom from our ancestors, from our ancestral ways of doing things. Reclaim that, retool, and use those same practices and strategies, but we update and we improve. And as we do that, we heal, we move on. I need us to think about that when it comes to self-care, particularly self-care for Black women. Another thing, final thought I want to drop on is that self-care our version of self-care. And I'm probably going to step on some toes when I say this, but there are aspects of our version, a decolonized version of self-care, the decolonized version of self-care that requires gatekeeping. Why? It's because you have these, as long as these systems are in place, these systems of oppression, these systems of white supremacy and racism, and state sanctioned violence against people of color, particularly black folks, not just here in the diaspora, but globally, there is a need for us as a people and as women in particular to gatekeep our practices so that they don't become appropriated, exploited, and weaponized against us. Because if we want to have those safe, nurturing spaces to self-care in the way that is culturally relevant and necessary for us, hate to break it to a lot of folks, we're going to need to gatekeep that. And some people do have a problem with that, unfortunately. There are some black gurus, if you will, who are, large creators who want to include everybody. But guess what? We're not for everybody. Our practices are not for everybody. And history has shown that when you open up your practices that are sacred and that are culturally relevant and indigenous to you or in your people, there's a tendency, because we live in a world that is anti-black, that is rife with patriarchy and white supremacy, exploitation, and insecurity creeps in, and then it becomes a danger to us. And if we're going to heal, stay healed, stay empowered and liberated, we have to gatekeep. And so I just wanted to share that with you today, Self-Care Sunday. And that's my message to Black women everywhere. As a self-care and health coach for Black women over 40, this is something that is close and entrenched in my very being. I have seen it. My years on this earth can attest to it. Things that have happened in my own ancestry and lineage have bore witness to that, anecdotally and statistically as well. Researchers have shown this, the same thing that I'm stating here in more, academic terms. But bottom line, self-care as it needs to be practiced for Black women, as it needs to be internalized and utilized for us as a collective of Black women, there are aspects of it that are closed. Is a good amount of it that's closed, and that's why I, as a women's self-care and health coach, I speak on this a lot, but I also understand that there are certain things that you will never see on my channel when it comes to self-care for Black women. I keep that for another platform. I share that on another platform, and I share that in my sessions with my clients because some things need to be gate-kept. And that's just the reality of it. So thank you for joining me today. Self-Care Sunday. I need you to take this time, be reflective, ask yourself, what do you need unapologetically as a Black woman to heal, to do the necessary self-care, to create the space that you need in order to be wealthy and healthy and liberated, undomesticated. What do you need today? So this is Tonye Barango, the self-care maven. Again, helping Black women everywhere look better, feel better without the pressure of other people's expectations. Live well, live healthy, live free. Till next time, bye-bye. Don't forget, hit that follow button and keep on watching.